Prepare to take the first steps to becoming a solicitor with Independent College Dublin and our FE1 exam preparatory course for the Law Society of Ireland's entrance exams. Learn from some of Ireland's leading law lecturers and know that you're getting a highly experienced, dedicated, results-driven team with excellent training materials and manuals. Take your FE1 exams with proficiency and confidence with Independent College Dublin starting on the 31st of May. Apply now at independentcolleges.ie.
Someone once told me, integrity is what you do when no one is looking. And that's great advice, but lately I've been thinking that maybe we are really measured by what we do when the world is watching, when our friends are watching. When our friends are in the wrong, what do you do? When everyone's eyes are on you, how do you handle it? When you've got the chance to make your voice heard, what do you do with that opportunity? Sometimes I think it's those moments that define us far more than what we do in private. My name is Josh, and you're listening to All the People You Should Know. Good morning. I know you're used to hearing a bunch of updates about the show here at the beginning, and that information is still coming just at the end. It seems like that's going to be the best business decision for the show, so especially this episode, make sure you stick around to the very end because I've got a couple pretty cool pieces of news. So, needless to say, the last couple weeks have been absolutely insane. And it got me thinking. That quote that I read you in the intro is pretty popular. It might even be a cliche at this point, and you all know my affinity for a good cliche. The person that told me certainly wasn't the first to say it, and the person that told them certainly wasn't the first to say it either. In fact, we're not really exactly sure who said it first. It's most often attributed to C.S. Lewis, who is one of my favorite authors and people in general, but sadly, it doesn't look like it's an exact quote of his. The closest thing I could find was actually from a psychology journal written by an unknown author, and even that quote isn't exactly word for word. Regardless, it's a great prompt to get us thinking about ourselves and our character. I've been thinking about those things quite a bit this week. I want you to keep that quote in mind, even though we don't know who said it exactly. I want you to keep it in mind as we go through today's episode. Photos are a really incredible thing. It's amazing how a little device can capture our reality and press it onto a small piece of paper, or today an SD card, which can then be uploaded to all sorts of different places. Sometimes I think about how strongly our perception of the past is formed by images. Photos like Kevin Carter's controversial Starving Child in Vulture, Nick Utt's The Terror of War, Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother, and Jeff Widener's Tank Man are just some of the iconic images that have shaped me. And the way that I think about humanity in war and struggle. Those images are as much a part of my worldview as anything else is. But there is one photo that I only recently found which has carved its way into that same part of my brain. The image, as far as I can tell, has no attributed photographer or title. Here's what I know about the photo. It was taken in 1936, and the image depicts a sea of people in black and white, arms outstretched at a 45-degree angle, fingers sharply pointed towards the sky. It's a photo of many, many men saluting Adolf Hitler. Now, the thing that makes this image interesting is that in the upper center there is one man who is not saluting. His arms are crossed and his eyes are narrowly pointed in a disgusted grimace. It took over 60 years, but in 1991 the man was identified, and his story reveals the very interesting reason he refused to salute. But before we get into his story, we first need to understand why every other man in the photo was saluting one of history's most reprehensibly evil monsters. One of the most common questions asked of historians and political science experts is, why did people follow Hitler? The answer is a bit complicated. One of the most simple ways to explain the phenomenon actually requires us to look at the end of World War I. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles buried Germany under the weight of massive reparations, restrictions, sanctions, loss of territory, and demilitarization. And, as you can imagine, facing such drastic punishment, Germany began to wither. And after years of facing such terrible conditions, the German people were fed up, but it goes even deeper than just being placed in economic and political hardship. Germany and the German people were looked down upon by their neighbors as being weak and inferior. So, when a young, passionate political upstart began giving speeches promising to restore Germany to its former glory, people were obviously interested. Now, we know that Hitler had a far darker plan in store than just reclaiming lost money and land and power, but it's difficult to say how much of that plan was revealed to the general population. Essentially, and please understand this is a very, very concise summary. People have written giant books about this exact subject. But essentially, Hitler identified the needs of an already frustrated people, empathized with their troubles, and promised them that he would give them a better life, and then flooded them with false and misleading information. He got people on board, then, by using propaganda and what we might call fake news, quote-unquote, today, he empowered them to follow him into the fire and bloodshed of war. And worse, many of them had been so indoctrinated and believed his lies so thoroughly, they even followed him into the walls of concentration camps where they helped him eradicate millions and millions of innocent people. It's absolutely shocking. But that's the power of a good con artist. They take the vulnerable and manipulate them to do their wishes, whether that's go to war or storm the Capitol. And in case you're wondering, I'm not being subtle today. Now, the photo we discussed earlier was taken 3 years before the start of World War II. It was actually taken at a shipyard, and I can't find the exact context, but the little bit that I could find, combined with some general assumptions that I feel safe enough to make, leads me to believe that it was at one of Hitler's rallies, probably at about the time he was beginning to ramp up his rhetoric to become more violent and radical. The man in the photo who refused to salute Hitler was named August Landmesser. He had a very complicated relationship with the Nazi Party. You see, Landmesser was born in 1920 in Morage, I think. By the way, before we get any further in this, I just want to say that, there's a lot of German names in here, and you all know that I'm bad at pronunciation, so have some grace with me. But he was born in 1920 in Morage, and I don't know much about his early life, but I do know that in 1931, at the age of 21, he joined the Nazi Party hoping that it would help him secure employment. Now, it seems like his time in the party was uneventful, or at least not eventful enough to comment on until 1935, when he was expelled from the party after marrying and having a child with a woman named Irma Eckler, who was Jewish. A year after this incident, we see him in the photo, arms crossed, defiantly protesting the Nazi Party at the shipyard, likely where he worked. Another year later, and Irma was pregnant again. The young couple and their toddler Ingrid tried to flee to Germany to start a new life in Denmark, but they were stopped at the border. This time, rather than just being expelled from the party, August was taken to jail where he was charged with dishonoring the race, and served about a 10-month term before being released when the courts didn't adequately prove that Irma was fully Jewish. After being released, the young couple defiantly continued their relationship publicly, until August was arrested again in 1938. This time he was sentenced to a 2.5-year stay at Borgermoor concentration camp. Irma was detained and taken to Fürstenbell concentration camp, where she gave birth to their second daughter, Irene. From there, Irma was sent to the Oranienburg concentration camp, and then to Lichtenberg concentration camp, and next to the women's concentration camp at Ravensbrück. Irma's final destination would be the Bernburg Euthanasia Center, where she would be one of an astounding 14,000 people murdered. Their children eventually disappeared into foster care, and August would never see any of them again. After serving his time in Borgermoor, August found work in transportation, but in 1944 he was drafted into a penal battalion, specifically the 999th Fort Infantry Brigade. These penal battalions promised convicted prisoners and those enslaved in concentration camps that if they participated in the war, they would be cleared of their charges and that they would get a fresh start. However, more often than not, penal battalions were used as cannon fodder. They were sent on suicide missions and were pretty much destined to die with the hope of a new life in their hearts. And this was the fate of August Landmesser. He was declared missing in action, and through the course of post-war paperwork was declared dead in 1949. Sometimes when we read about World War II and the Holocaust, we wonder why nobody stood up to Hitler. Like, once they realized how dark and evil things were, why didn't they say something or do something? And the scary part is that they did. You see, it was by no accident that Landmesser was sent to Borgermoor. By the time he arrived there, at least 50% of its population was deserters, and those who dared to stand up to the Nazi Party. They tried. Obviously not the majority, but people tried to defy a system which was objectively evil, and when they did, they lost everything. In fact, there were even 6 assassination attempts on Hitler's life, all by regular people trying desperately to end the madness. Unfortunately, he survived them all, and I believe it only fed into his grandiose ego. Now, maybe you're wondering how we know so much about this man and his family. Remarkably enough, his daughter Irene, the one he never met, actually put together a family tree in 1996, which allowed her to connect the dots all the way back to August. She also wrote a book detailing her family's history, complete with original documents and personal letters. I would love so much to get my hands on that book and give it a read, but unfortunately, it's all in German, and as you can tell, my ability to read, understand, or pronounce German is complete trash. Landmesser's story is such an interesting and compelling one. For me, it all started with that iconic image. And I'll post that image to my social medias for those who are curious, at AllThePeoplePod, wherever there are usernames that require ats. I think one of the things that is so important about Landmesser's story is that it tells the story of those like him, those who dare to stand up to the Nazi Party, and it kind of reveals an aspect of what life was like in Nazi Germany that is sometimes overlooked. To quote possibly one of the most important historians ever, Leopold von Ranke, it shows the past as it actually was. I feel like Landmesser's story hits me differently this week than it did 3 or 4 weeks ago when I first saw that photo. I'm sure that just about everyone knows what happened this week, but in case you're listening in the future, or maybe you're one of my awesome international listeners, last week in the U.S., hundreds of President Trump's supporters stormed the White House in protest of the 2020 presidential election results. Now, before I continue, I want to make it clear, I'm not comparing President Trump to Hitler. Most of the time, that's a lazy comparison made by people who don't know enough about history or politics to make a more astute conclusion. But what President Trump is a fascist. He has followed the playbook of people like Hitler and Stalin by identifying a vulnerable group, empathizing with their troubles, promising them a better life, and, to be fair, he didn't have to come up with propaganda himself, the internet did it for him. The people that stormed the White House were high on wild lies given to them by random people on the internet. And let me be clear about this as well, the people who stormed the Capitol don't represent all Republicans. I know many, many Republicans who don't agree with those actions at all. To quote one of my friends, there are a lot of people out there that think that they're Republicans and Christians, but by their actions and beliefs, they're neither. So please, before you judge all Republicans, remember there are plenty of reasonable, kind, giving, good people out there that vote for Republicans. I don't, really, but that doesn't make me better or smarter or more morally just than them. It just means that we interpret politics and scripture and our own experiences differently. And that's what makes America great. Not lies and propaganda or a reprehensible man. America is a celebration of differences. But we need to help our friends and family stay clear of the Trump party. It is dangerous. And again, I'm not being subtle today. I hope that doesn't offend any of you. I try my best to keep politics out of my history show, but that's pretty difficult because much of history is yesterday's politics. And as promised, here are some really fun updates. You can now go to allthepeoplepod.com and check out my new website. It's got a link to some new merch, a new page to support the show, and of course, a link to the network. All of the shows over there are great. They are some of my personal favorites. So if you would please try to go over to allthepeoplenetwork.com and check out some of those shows. It would be awesome. Also, you'll hear some automated ads now. That's because I'm hosting through a service called Red Circle, and they allow me to do that. It might be annoying for you, but it's pretty much the only way that I can make money while I'm in school. Aside from my actual job, it's the only way I can make money off of this show while I'm in school, because soliciting my own ads, as you know, takes literally forever, and most of the time it doesn't pan out. So, let's see. I got a cool rebranding done. You'll probably notice it in your podcast player this morning. I had this guy on Fiverr make some really, really cool art for me, which was awesome. He gave me 3 different versions for $7 plus tax. It was amazing. I think that's it. The episodes are, it's not it. I said I think that's it, but clearly it's not it. Episodes are going to start coming out. I'm going to try every other week, but I just started writing my thesis, which at my university is a 2-part process. So for the next 24 weeks of my life, I'm going to be buried under a mountain of work. So I'm going to shoot for every other week still, but there might be weeks here and there where it's going to have to be 2 weeks in between episodes. Unfortunately, my goal was to break 500,000 streams. I don't know what the word is. I'm super bad at actually the business part of this stupid thing. My goal was we broke 250,000 this last year. I was going to hopefully try to break 500,000 going into 2021, but I don't know. I have this sneaking suspicion that it's not going to be, I'm not going to be able to put out quite as many episodes, partially because my professor told me that one of the classes I'm taking, which is the first part of my thesis class, is going to be the hardest class I've ever taken, and that the coursework is absolutely brutal. And usually I feel like professors try to tell you you can do it, it's going to be fun. But he was straight up preparing me to go to war or something. So episodes might have to just be a little bit less frequent this year. And if that's true, I'm really, really sorry. I just appreciate you guys so much for listening. Again, go to allthepeoplenetwork.com, listen to my friends, go to allthepeoplepod.com to see more of my stupid stuff, and have a nice week.
You out this world, need some space for me. I'm out here, girl, I'm back up in the street. So I don't really got time to fuss and fight no more with you. Really got time to fuss and fight no more. Why you tripping, baby? You know you is like that. Acting like you know what's up, but you ain't psychic. Told you nothing going down, but you ain't like it. I told you nothing going down when you excited. So if you want a song, go and get the one. Show me the money, get the money, let's go down, down. Make it up, when we make it all, make it up, make it up, make it up, then we make it up, You out this world, need some space for me. I'm out here, girl, I'm back up in the street. So I don't really got time to fuss and fight no more with you. Really got time to fuss and fight no more. What's the problem? What's the issue? Everything I said has been true. Love you, then he ditched you. Nobody knowing what we into. Not because of what you've been through. I know what you can do. Why you tripping, baby? You know you is like it. Keep the money,